The servant of Lord Voldemort. Hermione screamed. Black leapt to his feet. Harry jumped as though he would receive a huge electric shock. I found this at the base of the Whomping Willow, said Snape, throwing the cloak aside, careful to keep his wand pointing directly at Lupin's chest. Very useful, Potter. I thank you. Snape was slightly breathless, but his face was full of suppressed triumph. You're wondering, perhaps, how I knew you were here? He said, his eyes glittering. I've just been to your office, Lupin. You forgot to take your potion tonight, so I took a goblet along, and very lucky I did. Lucky for me, I mean. Lying on your desk was a certain map. One glance at it told me all I needed to know. I saw you running along the passageway out of sight. Service, Lupin began, but Snape overrode him. I've told the headmaster again and again how that you're helping your old friend Black into the castle, Lupin, and here's the proof. Not even I dreamed that you would have the nerve to use this old place as your hideout. Service, you're making a big mistake, said Lupin urgently. You haven't heard everything. I can explain. Sirius is not here to kill Harry. 2 more for Azkaban tonight, said Snape, his eyes now gleaming fanatically. I shall be interested to see how Dumbledore takes this. He was quite convinced you were harmless, you know, Lupin. A tame werewolf. You fool, said Lupin softly. It's a schoolboy grudge worth putting an innocent man back inside Azkaban. Bang! A thin snake-like cord burst out from the end of Snape's wand and twisted themselves around Lupin's mouth, wrists, and ankles. He overbalanced and fell on the floor, unable to move. With a roar of rage, Black started toward Snape, but Snape pointed his wand straight between Black's eyes. Give me a reason, he whispered. Give me a reason to do it, and I swear I will. Black stopped dead. It would have been impossible to say which face showed more hatred. Harry stood there, paralyzed, not knowing what to do or whom to believe. He glanced around at Ron and Hermione. Ron looked just as confused as he did, still fighting to keep hold of the struggling Scabbers. Hermione, however, took on a certain step towards Snape and said, in a very breathless voice, Professor Snape, it wouldn't hurt to hear what they've got to say, would it? Miss Granger, you are already facing suspension from this school, Snape spat. You, Potter and Weasley, are out of bounds in the company of convicted murderer and a werewolf. For once in your life, hold your tongue. But if there was a mistake, keep quiet, you stupid girl, Snape shouted, looking suddenly quite deranged. Don't talk about what you don't understand. A few sparks shot out of the end of his wand, which was still pointed at Black's face. Hermione fell silent. Vengeance is very sweet, Snape breathed at Black. How I hoped I would be the one to catch you. The joke's on you again, Service, Black snarled. As long as this boy brings this rat up to the castle, he jerked his head at Ron, I'll come quietly. Up to the castle, Snape said silkily. I don't think we need to go that far. All I have to do is call the Dementors. Once we get out of the Willow, they'll be pleased to see you, Black, pleased enough to give you the kiss of death. A little kiss, I dare say. What little color there was left in Black's face left. You've got to hear me out, he croaked. The rat! Look at the rat! But there was a mad glint in Snape's eyes, and Harry had never seen before. He seemed beyond reason. Come on, all of you, he said. He clicked his fingers, and the ends of the cords that bound Lupin's hands. I'll drag the werewolf. Perhaps the Dementors will have a kiss for him, too. Before he knew what he was doing, Harry had crossed the room in 3 strides, blocked the door. "Get out of the way, Potter. You're in enough trouble already," snarled Snape. "If I hadn't been here to save your skin, Professor Lupin could have killed me about 100 times this year," Harry said. "I've been alone with him loads of times, having defense lessons against the Dementors. If he was helping Black, why didn't he just finish me off then?" "Don't ask me to fathom how a werewolf minds work," hissed Snape. "Get out of the way, Potter." "You're pathetic," Harry yelled. "Just because they made a fool of you at school, you won't even listen?" "Silence! I will not be spoken to like that," Snape shrieked, looking madder than ever. "Like father, like son, Potter. I have just saved your neck. You should be thanking me on bended knee. You would have been well served if he killed you. You'd have died like your father, too arrogant to believe you might be mistaken in Black. Now get out of the way, or I will make you. Get out of the way, Potter!" Harry made up his mind in a split second before Snape could take even one step towards him. He had his wand. "Expelliarmus!" he yelled. Except that his wasn't the only voice that shouted it. There was a blast made from the door rattle on his hinges. Snape was lifted off his feet, slammed against the wall. Then he slid down to the floor, a trickle of blood oozing from under his hair. He had been knocked out. Harry looked around. Both Ron and Hermione had tried to disarm Snape at exactly the same time. Snape's wand soared high in an arc and landed on the bed next to Crookshanks. "You shouldn't have done that," said Black, looking at Harry. "You should have left him to me." Harry avoided Black's eyes. He wasn't sure even now that he had done the right thing. We attacked a teacher," Hermione whimpered, staring at the lifeless Snape with frightened eyes. "Oh, we're going to be in so much trouble." Lupin was struggling against his bonds. Black bent down quickly and untied them, and Lupin straightened up, rubbing his arms where the ropes had cut into them. "Thank you, Harry," he said. "I'm still not saying I believe you," Harry retorted. "Then it's time we offered some proof. Black, you boy, give me Peter now." Ron clutched Scabbers closer to his chest. "Come off it," he said weakly. "Are you trying to say that he broke out of Azkaban just to get his hand on Scabbers? I mean..." He looked up at Harry and Hermione for support. "Okay, say Pettigrew could turn into a rat. There are millions of rats. How's he supposed to know which one he's after if he was locked up in Azkaban?" "You know, Sirius, that's a fair question," said Lupin, turning to Black, frowning slightly. "How did you find out where he was?" Black put on a claw-like hands inside his robe, took out the crumpled piece of paper which he had smoothed flat out to show the others. It was a photograph of Ron and his family that had appeared in the Daily Prophet in the previous summer, and there, on Ron's shoulders, was Scabbers. "How did you get this?" Lupin asked Black, thunderstruck. "Fudge," said Black. "When they came to inspect Azkaban last year, he gave me his paper. And there was Peter on the front page, on this boy's shoulder. I knew him at once. How many times have I seen him transform? And the caption said the boy was going to go back to Hogwarts, to where Harry was." "My God," said Lupin softly, staring at the Scabbers in the picture in the paper and looking back again. "His front paw." "What about it?" said Ron defiantly. "He's got a toe missing," said Black. "Of course," Lupin breathed. "So simple, so brilliant. He cut it off himself." "Just before he transformed," said Black. "When I cornered him, he yelled for the whole street to hear that I betrayed Lily and James. Then before I could curse him, he blew apart the street with the wand behind his back, killed everyone within 20 feet of him, and then sped down into the sewer with all the other rats." Didn't you ever hear, Ron? Said Lupin. The biggest bit of Peter they found was his finger. Look, Scabbers is probably a fight with another rat or something. He's been in my family for ages, right? 12 years, in fact, said Lupin. Didn't you ever wonder why he was living so long? We've been taking good care of him, said Ron. Not looking too good at the moment, though, is he? Said Lupin. I guess he's been losing weight ever since he heard Sirius was on the loose again. He's been scared of that mad cat, said Ron, nodding towards Crookshanks, who was still purring on the bed. But that wasn't right, Harry thought. Suddenly, Scabbers had been looking ill before he met Crookshanks. Ever since Ron's return from Egypt, ever since the time that Black had escaped. This cat isn't mad, said Black hoarsely. He stretched out his bony hand and stroked Crookshanks' fluffy head. He's the most intelligent of his kind I've ever met. He recognized Peter for what he was right away, and when he met me, he knew I was no dog. It was a while before he trusted me. Finally, I managed to communicate to him what I was after, and he's been helping me. What do you mean? Breathed Hermione. He tried to bring Peter to me, but couldn't, so he stole the passwords into Gryffindor Tower for me. As I understood it, they took him from the boy on the bedside table. Harry's brain seemed to be sagging under the weight of what he was hearing. It was absurd, and yet... But Peter got wind of what was going on and ran for it, croaked Black. This cat, Crookshanks, did you all call him? Told me that Peter had left blood on the sheets. I suppose he bit himself. Well, faking his own death had worked once. These words jolted Harry to his senses. And why did he fake his death? He said furiously. Because he knew you were about to kill him like you killed my parents? No, said Lupin. Harry. And now you've come off to finish him off? Yes, I have, Black said with an evil look at Scabbers. Then I should have let Snape take you, Harry shouted. Harry, said Lupin hurriedly, don't you see? All the time we've thought Sirius betrayed your mom, and Peter tracked him down. But it was the other way around, don't you see? Peter betrayed your mother and father. Sirius tracked Peter down. That's not true, Harry yelled. It was the other way. He was the secret keeper. He said so before you turned up. He said he killed him. He was pointing at Black, who shook his head slowly, and the sunken eyes were suddenly overbright. Harry, I as good as killed him, he croaked. I persuaded Lily and James to change to Peter at the last moment. I persuaded them to use the secret keeper instead of me. I am to blame, I know it. The night they died, I'd arranged to check on Peter to make sure they were still safe. But when I arrived to his hiding place, he'd gone. There was no sign of a struggle. It didn't even feel right. I was scared, so I set out for your parents' house straight away. And when I saw their house destroyed and their bodies, I realized Peter must have done what I had done. His voice broke, and he turned away. Enough of this, said Lupin, and there was a steely note in his voice Harry had never heard before. There's one certain way to prove what really happened. Ron, give me that rat. What are you going to do with it if I give it to you? Ron said to Lupin tensely. Force him to show himself, said Lupin. If he really is a rat, it won't hurt him. Ron hesitated. Then at long last he held Scabbers, and Lupin took him. Scabbers began to squeak without stopping, twisting and turning, a tiny black eyes bulging in his head. Ready, Sirius? Said Lupin. Black had already retrieved Snape's wand from the bed. He approached Lupin with the struggling rat, and with his wet eyes suddenly seemed to be burning in his face. Together, they said quietly. I think so, said Lupin, holding Scabbers tight in one hand, and the wand in the other. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3! A flash of blue light erupted from both of their wands. For a moment, Scabbers was frozen in midair. A small, gray form twisting madly. Ron yelled. The rat fell and hit the floor. There was another blinding flash of light, and then it was like watching a speeded up film of a growing tree. A head showed, was shooting upward from the ground, limbs sprouting. A moment later, a man was standing where Scabbers had been, cringing and wringing his hands. Crookshanks was spitting and snarling on the bed, and the hair on his back was standing up. He was a very short man, hardly taller than Harry and Hermione. His thin, colorless hair was unkempt, and he was a large bald patch on the top. He had shrunken appearance of a plump man who had lost a lot of weight in a short time. His skin looked grubby, almost like Scabbers' fur, and something of the rat lingered around the point nose, very small, watery eyes. He looked around at them, and breathing fast and shallow, Harry saw his eyes dart to the door and back again. Well, hello, Peter, said Lupin pleasantly, as though rats frequently erupted from an old school friend into an old school friends around him. Long time no see. Sirius, Remus, said Pettigrew's voice, squeaky. Again, his eyes darted towards the door. My friends! My old friends! Black's wand arm rose, but Lupin seized him around the wrist, gave him a warning look, and turned again to Pettigrew, whose voice light and casual. We've been having a little chat, Peter, about what happened the night Lily and James died. You might have missed the finer points while you were squeaking around down there on the bed. Remus, gasped Pettigrew, and Harry could see the beads of sweat breaking over his pasty face. You don't believe him, do you? He tried to kill me, Remus. So I've heard, said Lupin more coldly. I'd like to clear up one or two little matters with you, Peter, if you'd be so. He's come to try to kill me again, Peter squeaked suddenly, pointing at Black, and Harry saw that he used his middle finger because his index finger was missing. He killed Lily and James, and now he's going to kill me too. You've got to help me, Remus. Black's face looked more like skull-like than ever as he stared at Peter Pettigrew with his fathomless eyes. No one's going to try to kill you until we've sorted a few things out, said Lupin. Sorted things out, squeaked Pettigrew, looking wildly about him once more, eyes taking in the boarded window, and again the only door. I knew he'd come after me. I knew he was back for me, and I've been waiting for this for 12 years. You knew Sirius was going to break out of Azkaban? Said Lupin with his brow furrowed. Well, nobody has ever done that before.